August 12th, 1945. Los Alamos, New Mexico. The desert air outside is still cool. But inside the concrete bunker, the air feels thicker, like it is holding its breath. A single yellow bulb hums above a steel vault door. On the floor, chalk dust outlines recent measurements, formulas, and a rough sketch of a fat, stubby bomb casing. A young lieutenant stands rigidly beside the vault, clipboard in hand. His name is Robert Keller, Ordnance Section, United States Army. Sweat beads at his temple even though the room is not particularly warm. You can almost hear his heartbeat in the silence. Behind him, slow, deliberate footsteps approach. General Leslie Groves appears in the doorway, his bulk filling the frame, his expression as unreadable as ever. Beside him walks J. Robert Oppenheimer, thinner, more haunted than he had been before Hiroshima. Groves gives the vault a curt glance, as if it is a subordinate to be inspected. Oppenheimer looks at it like a confession. Keller snaps to attention. "Sir, the core was weighed again at 2600. Seals intact. No irregularities." Groves grunts approval. "This is it. Doctor. Bomb number 3. The words hang in the air. Third bomb. Not theory, not an experiment in the New Mexico desert. Not the fireball that consumed Hiroshima. Not the second flash that tore Nagasaki apart 3 days ago. This is something else. A promise, a threat, a bargaining chip." Oppenheimer studies the heavy steel door, then the small brass tag on the clipboard that reads simply, "Special Assembly 3. "It is interesting," he says quietly, "how quickly a miracle becomes inventory." Groves ignores the line. The president needs to know exactly what he has, and when he has it, he says. "How fast can we have this one ready for combat delivery?" Keller swallows. "Once the order is given, sir, we can ship the core to Tinian and assemble in the field. Estimate 4 to 5 days to operational status, depending on transport." Groves nods. That is what he came to hear. Numbers, timelines, certainty. You almost see the invisible map in his mind. Tokyo, Vladivostok, Moscow. Cities that now fit into the radius of a weapon kept behind this single steel door. Far away, across an ocean and a ruined continent, another man is thinking about that same door without having ever seen it. Potsdam, Germany. Earlier that summer, Harry S. Truman stands by a window in the palace, looking out at the garden where Stalin and Churchill had walked with him days before. On the table behind him lies a cable from the United States, its neat, typewritten lines clinically describing a successful test in New Mexico and the expectation of additional bombs becoming available. Stimson's voice is still in his ears, careful and measured. "Mr. President, this changes our position. Not just with Japan, with everyone." Truman had walked into Potsdam as the new man among giants. Stalin, the implacable Soviet marshal, Churchill, then Attlee. Victors who had carried the war for years before the United States fully joined. But after Trinity, and after the first bomb was dropped, the weight in the room shifted. Now, with the second bomb already used and the knowledge that a third sits waiting, that shift becomes something sharper, an edge. Back in Los Alamos, Oppenheimer turns away from the vault. "General, how many do you think we will need before the world understands?" Groves does not hesitate. "As many as it takes for them to believe we can keep making them," he says. He does not specify who they are. On some level, everyone in the bunker knows. Not only Japan, not only the scattered remnants of the Axis, but the ally that is already starting to look like the next adversary, the Soviet Union. You can almost feel the moment stretching between the bunker in New Mexico and the conference rooms in Germany, connecting the quiet weight of the third bomb to the careful phrasing of diplomatic cables. Inside the vault, behind inches of steel, sits a core of plutonium, cold and inert, yet already altering the way great powers think. No mushroom cloud is needed. The possibility alone is beginning to cast a long shadow. And in that shadow, strategies are starting to change. August 15th, 1945. Washington, D.C., late afternoon. The corridors of the White House still hum with the echo of cheering crowds outside. Japan has announced its surrender. Church bells have rung all morning. Paper confetti still clings to the wet pavement after an afternoon rain. Inside the Oval Office, the air smells of tobacco and fresh ink. Harry Truman sits behind the desk, a sheet of paper in front of him. But he is not reading it. His gaze is fixed on a handwritten note lying to the side. Numbers, dates, projected production. Groves's latest report. 2 bombs used. Hiroshima, Nagasaki. The 3rd Corps in reserve. More plutonium on the way. If everything holds, 1 bomb ready in late August. Another in September. More after that. A thin trickle. Not a flood. But still a trickle of something no one else in the world can make yet. Secretary of State James Burns stands by the window, listening to the distant roar of celebration from Pennsylvania Avenue. The war is over, Mr. President, he says gently. Truman nods, but his fingers tap once on the Groves memo. This part is not over, he murmurs. Not yet. Burns steps closer. The Soviets will be watching everything we do now, he says. Eastern Europe, Germany, the Straits, Iran. They will test us. Truman picks up the memo, the paper crackling. And we will answer, he says. With this in our pocket, he does not say the word bomb. He does not need to. That night, across the world, the chandeliers of the Kremlin throw cold light across green felt tables. Stalin sits beneath them, a pipe between his fingers, listening as a translator reads the latest American news reports aloud. Mentions of new weapons, unprecedented power. More bombs expected. Beside him, Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov keeps his face carefully blank. What do they have? Really? Stalin asks quietly. Lavrenti Beria answers, eyes bright, eager to prove his value. Comrade, our sources indicate their production is not yet large. A few bombs only, but they are building the factories to make more. They will try to frighten us with them while they are still alone. Stalin exhales, a slow plume of smoke. Then we will not be frightened, he says. Not in public. He taps ash into a tray, then looks at Beria. In private, you will make sure we are never in this position again. Beria inclines his head. In his mind, he is already seeing blueprints, lab benches, the faces of physicists like Kurchatov. Behind the formal language of orders, the meaning is simple. Match the Americans, break their monopoly. For the moment, though, the monopoly is real. September 1945. London. The Council of Foreign Ministers meets in a grand hall still scarred by war. Gaps in the stained glass have been patched with plain panes. Cold drafts coil through the corners. Around the table sit Burns, Molotov, and British Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin. The subject is Germany. Borders, reparations, the shape of peace in Europe. But floating above every map, every sentence, is the unseen outline of a bomb casing. Molotov presses for heavy reparations for the Soviet Union. Influence in the Eastern Mediterranean. A stronger hand in the occupation zones. He speaks in the flat, patient tone of a man who believes time and geography are on his side. Burns answers with unexpected firmness. The United States cannot agree to arrangements that would destabilize Western Europe, he says. Nor will we accept permanent Soviet dominance beyond what was agreed. He does not mention Hiroshima. He does not point at the sky. Instead, he lets the fact sit unspoken, like a loaded weapon on the table. America has used 2 atomic bombs. Reports suggest it has more. In a side conversation, A British aide whispers, "He is talking as if he has an extra army." Bevan replies under his breath, "Perhaps he has something worse than an army." That is the subtle shift the third bomb creates. The United States delegation is no longer simply one power among three. It is a power that might, if pushed, hint at a capacity to destroy cities instantly, and to do so again and again as production grows. The stockpile is tiny, fragile, dependent on complex machinery and rare materials. Yet in these months it is enough to stiffen backs, toughen positions, make compromise feel less necessary in Washington. In Moscow, it has the opposite effect. It breeds urgency, suspicion, the conviction that time favors the United States, not the Soviet Union, unless something changes. Between these two moods, the first lines of the Cold War are beginning to be drawn, not only on maps, but in the imagined range of an invisible arsenal. June 14th, 1946, New York City. The air in the United Nations chamber is warm, heavy with the mingled scents of cologne, paper, and anticipation. Flags of the new organization hang above the delegates, bright symbols for a world still smelling of burned cities. On the floor, Bernard Baruch adjusts his papers with a slightly theatrical care. White hair, tailored suit, the confidence of a Wall Street elder statesman turned statesman of something far more dangerous. He glances up at the circle of faces staring down at him. American, British, French, Soviet, allies in name, rivals in waiting. You sit with the observers in the back row, close enough to see his hands tremble, just a little. He begins. "We are here to make a choice between the quick and the dead," he says. The words land like a physical blow, even in translation, even in the carefully controlled language of diplomacy. Everyone hears what stands behind them: Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the third bomb that was never dropped but is whispered about in cables and memoranda, the growing stockpile that only one nation possesses. Baruch lays out the American proposal: international control of atomic energy, inspections, a world authority that would own and regulate every mine, every reactor, every lab. In return, the United States would eventually give up its bombs. Eventually, after controls, after guarantees, after a period in which the monopoly would remain firmly in American hands. At the Soviet table, Andrei Gromyko listens without a flicker of expression. His pencil moves occasionally on his pad, but he is not really taking notes. He is translating the speech into another language entirely. In his mind, Baruch is not promising safety. He is promising a world in which the United States decides who can have the bomb and who cannot, backed by the immediate reality of those few completed weapons sitting in bunkers like the one at Los Alamos. Behind Gromyko, the Soviet advisor whispers, "They want us to trust them while they hold the gun." Gromyko does not reply. He merely waits for his turn. When he speaks, his tone is smooth, courteous, and cold. "The Soviet Union will accept international control," he says, "but only if existing bombs are destroyed first. No special rights, no American exception, no period in which one power holds the whip hand." Everyone in the room understands what that really means. The Americans will not give up the advantage they fought to gain. The Soviets will not accept a system built on that advantage. The Baruch plan is born on the edge of failure, yet outside the chamber. In Washington, the plan has already served one purpose. It has allowed American leaders to imagine that the monopoly on bombs can be converted into a kind of moral and political authority. In a Pentagon conference room, air thick with cigarette smoke, officers from the Army Air Forces pin maps to the wall. Red pins for Soviet industrial centers, blue pins for existing and projected American bases. "This is what we can cover with what we have now," one planner says, drawing circles around targets with a compass. The circles are fewer than he would like. Maybe a dozen bombs in the next year if everything goes smoothly. Each one precious, each one a symbol of power, yet far from enough to win a total war on their own. But they do not know how many we have, another officer replies. They only know that they have 0. That is the crux of it. The third bomb, and the handful that follow it, are not just physical objects. They are numbers that can be inflated in rumor, multiplied in the imagination of Soviet generals. In Moscow, Stalin receives new intelligence estimates. Some say the Americans may have dozens of bombs already. Others say they are limited, vulnerable, dependent on a few key plants. He does not know which is true, so he assumes the worst. Treat it as if they can destroy any city at will, he instructs his staff, until we can answer in kind. So the Baruch plan stalls. The meetings stretch on, but the positions calcify, publicly. Both sides speak of peace, control, responsibility, privately. Both race to secure their own bomb realities. In that gap between what is said and what is feared, the American atomic monopoly becomes less a shield for peace and more a catalyst for mistrust. For a brief moment, the third bomb offers leverage. At the same time, it guarantees that the Soviets will never again allow themselves to be in such a position. March 12, 1947, Washington, D.C. Television cameras are still rare, so the room is packed wall to wall with reporters, stenographers, and staff. The house chamber smells of wool, sweat, and the faint tang of floor polish. Above, the galleries are crowded with guests leaning forward over the rail. Harry Truman steps to the podium, a prepared text in his hands. He looks smaller than the office he carries, but his voice, when it comes, is firm. It must be the policy of the United States, he says, to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. Greece, Turkey, those are the immediate subjects. But everyone in the room hears more than geography. They hear a declaration that the United States will stand in front of Soviet expansion, not simply alongside it. Up in the gallery, an Air Force colonel listens with a quiet smile. He had spent the morning in a different briefing room, one where the talk was not of speeches but of stockpiles. By early 1947, the numbers have grown. No longer a single third bomb guarding a bare cupboard, but a small, steadily expanding arsenal. A dozen warheads assembled or close to ready. More cores in process. Still fragile. Still dependent on bottleneck facilities at Hanford and Oak Ridge. Yet enough for planners to imagine something that did not exist when the war ended a strategic bombing campaign with atomic weapons as its spearhead. To the colonel, Truman's speech is more than policy. It is a commitment that assumes the bomb is there as a last argument, across the ocean. The words arrive in Moscow as a cable on a polished wooden desk. Stalin reads the translation in silence, pipe smoke curling slowly upward. Support free peoples, he repeats, the phrase dry in his mouth. To him, it is an announcement that the Americans are forming a barrier around his sphere, and behind that barrier, there is something he does not yet have. Beria stands at his side, holding another folder. Inside are sketches of reactors, names of scientists, production schedules for plutonium. Kurchatov's wild hair stares out from a small photograph. They are speaking boldly because they believe they are safe. Stalin says, because of their bombs. Beria nods. He knows the figure that has been circulating among Soviet intelligence analysts, perhaps 20 bombs by the end of the year. More each year after. No one is certain. No one can be. That uncertainty is itself a weapon. They think they can draw lines, and we will not cross. Stalin continues, we will not test them where they feel strongest. So we will test them where they feel weakest. He taps his finger on a map of Europe. Berlin, Prague, the Balkans, places where tanks and party cadres matter more than distant bombers. Summer 1947, Paris. The sun glints off war-damaged facades as foreign ministers gather to discuss the American offer now called the Marshall Plan. Inside the conference hall, The air is thick with competing futures. One version of Europe is devastated, dependent, vulnerable to communist parties promising bread and equality. Another is rebuilt with American money. Its economies tied to Washington, its governments wary of Moscow. The Soviet delegation sits stonily as the outlines are explained. Massive aid, but on conditions. Shared accounting, coordinated economic planning, transparency. To American diplomats, these conditions are practical safeguards. To the Soviets, they look like economic encirclement, backed by an atomic monopoly. In a quiet corner, a French official murmurs to a British colleague. They are not just buying goodwill. They are building a world in which resistance to them will be very expensive. The British man nods. And every factory the Americans help rebuild becomes another hostage if war ever comes. Another city that might vanish in one flash. The third bomb never dropped, but still present in the imagination, sits behind those thoughts. It represents the beginning of a new kind of calculation. It suggests that the United States can afford to rebuild, to spend, to commit troops and money, because in the last resort it has something no one else has. Back in Washington, in a secure office with no windows, an analyst at the newly formed Joint Nuclear Committee runs his finger down a column of figures. Stockpile at the end of 46. 9 units. Projection for end of 47. Perhaps 13 to 15, depending on throughput. Beside him, another analyst traces arrows on a map. If war came in the next 2 years, we would have very little conventional advantage against the Red Army in Europe. But we could probably devastate their key industrial centers, if they believe that. They will avoid direct confrontation and use pressure and proxies instead. It is all theory. No one is yet willing to gamble cities to test it. But the theory guides policy. It makes the Truman Doctrine feel less like a bluff. It encourages Congress to approve aid to Greece and Turkey, to fund the Marshall Plan, to accept a long, expensive rivalry. In the Kremlin, the response is different. The same calculations that give Washington confidence give Moscow urgency. Every month of American monopoly is a month in which Soviet diplomats must speak carefully. Soviet generals must imagine their rail hubs vaporized. Soviet scientists must work without sleep. So the third bomb, sitting quiet in its vault months earlier, has grown into something larger than a single weapon. It has become a clock, ticking in both capitals, counting down the time until the balance tilts again. June 24th, 1948. Night over Berlin. The city is a dark patchwork of rubble and flickering lamps. In the western sectors, people are just going to bed when the power flickers, steadies, and then the news begins to spread street to street. The Soviets have cut the roads. Trains are stopped. Barges are halted. The land routes into West Berlin are closed. In a small apartment above a ruined storefront, a German family listens to the radio. The voice is strained, explaining that the city of 2 million souls, the western half at least, is now an island surrounded by Soviet forces. No one mentions the bomb, but it is there, just behind the words. That same night in Washington, the Defense Department is lit up like a ship at sea. In a secure conference room, maps of Germany cover the walls. Generals and civilians sit around a long table. One side lie folders labeled Airlift, on the other, plans with harsher titles, sketching out what might happen if American convoys try to force the roads and the Soviets fire. On a separate table, under a simple paperweight, lies a slim folder with a different kind of plan. Target lists, Soviet rail yards, oil refineries, troop concentrations. A note on the cover, available atomic stockpile. The number inside is not impressive, perhaps a dozen usable bombs, with more parts in process. Enough to devastate key points, not enough to erase a continent. Yet, for a few hours, the men in the room imagine what it would mean to threaten them. We could inform them quietly that any interference with our aircraft will be treated as the first act of general war. One officer says, tapping the target list, we hint that we are prepared to respond with all available means. another man. State Department official. Shakes his head. If we say that, and they call our bluff, we are committed to either nuclear war or humiliation. The word hangs there. Humiliation. The atomic monopoly is powerful, but it is not absolute. It does not guarantee that the United States can always get its way. It means that if war comes on American terms, at a chosen time and over chosen targets, the bomb might be decisive. But Berlin is a knot of rail lines and human beings deep inside Soviet-controlled territory. So the decision comes down. No armed convoys, no atomic threats. Instead, aircraft. The Berlin airlift begins, a stream of C-47s and C-54s droning across the sky, landing every few minutes at Tempelhof and Gatow. Coal, flour, medicine, fuel. The sound of engines replaces the imagined sound of falling bombs. Yet even in this choice of restraint, the bomb is present. In Moscow, Stalin watches Western planes fly in daily without escort. He hears his generals' suggested options: fire a warning shot, stage an air incident, force a climb down. He shakes his head. If we attack their aircraft, we give them the war they are preparing for, he says. We give them an excuse to use their atomic weapon. He does not know that the American stockpile is too small, their delivery systems too few, their own planners uncertain of what would follow. He assumes strength. That assumption explains his caution. Late 1948. A windowless office in the Pentagon again. A colonel with deep lines under his eyes traces a new set of arrows on a fresh map. The plan is called Trojan, or perhaps Broiler, or Off-Tackle. The names change faster than the logic. Atomic strikes on Soviet industry at the outbreak of war, followed by conventional operations. On a chalkboard, someone writes assumed stockpile at D30-50 units. The number is only an estimate, a faith in production that has not yet caught up with strategy. But faith itself has become a planning tool. The belief that the bomb will be there in sufficient quantity in a year, or 2, or 3, gives American leaders nerve to form the North Atlantic Treaty, to promise that an attack on one will be treated as an attack on all. In Moscow, the same faith, inverted, drives desperation. In a guarded compound on the Volga, Kurchatov and his team work through bitter winters, building reactors, separating plutonium, assembling the first Soviet device piece by careful piece. The clock that the third bomb started is nearly at midnight. In Washington, that fact is dim, abstract. Reports say the Soviets are years away. There is still time. It seemed to use the monopoly to shape a favorable line across Europe. In the Soviet Union, the same reports are read with a different eye, even if the Americans underestimate them, even if they believe the Soviet program is slower. The only safety will come when there is a Soviet bomb sitting in a Soviet vault, answering the American third bomb with a first of their own. Until then, every crisis like Berlin is a dance at the edge of a cliff. Both sides staring past each other at the glow of a weapon that still belongs to only one of them. August 29th, 1949. Semipalatinsk test site. Kazakhstan. The steppe is wide and empty. The sky a hard pale blue. On a low rise, Soviet technicians huddle in a concrete bunker. The air heavy with dust and old cigarette smoke. A red second hand ticks around a clock bolted to the wall. Igor Kurchatov stands beneath it. Beard unkempt, eyes red from too many sleepless nights. Beside him, officers watch banks of instruments, needles trembling. A telephone line to Moscow sits silent, the handset resting in its cradle like a coiled animal. The final minutes pass. Orders are checked, then checked again. Charge circuits ready, a voice says. Kurchatov lifts his head. Years of strain narrow into this moment. Years of knowing that far away, in New Mexico and on Pacific Islands, another country held the only keys to the kingdom of fire. Years driven by the knowledge that Stalin wanted that imbalance ended, whatever the cost. Proceed, he answers. On the test tower miles away, The device they call RDS-1 waits, squat and ugly, a cousin of the American Fat Man. Detonators fire. A spherical wave of compression squeezes the plutonium core. For a fraction of a second, nothing seems to happen. Then the world outside the bunker turns white. Instruments kick, needles slam to the stops. A roar like the tearing of metal rolls across the steppe. The mushroom cloud climbs, dirty and immense, into the open sky. Inside the bunker, no one cheers. Not yet. They are scientists and soldiers trained to fear mistakes. They wait for confirmation, for numbers, yield, shape of the curve, ratios of fission. Finally, a technician turns, face pale. "It worked," he says. "Comrade, it worked." Only then does Kurchatov let out a long breath he did not realize he was holding. His hands shake. He grips the edge of the console to steady them. "Inform Moscow," an officer says. "The Union is no longer naked." 2 days later, in the Kremlin, Stalin listens to the report with hooded eyes. Beria speaks quickly, eager to claim credit, describing blast measurements, cloud height, photographic plates. "So, we have it," Stalin says at last. "Like the Americans." "Yes, comrade," Beria replies. "They no longer hold a monopoly." For a moment, Stalin says nothing. His gaze goes to a map pinned to the far wall. Europe, Asia, North America, laid out in faded colors. He thinks of Potsdam, of Truman's careful smile, of rumors that the Americans had a third bomb waiting even as they burned Hiroshima and Nagasaki. "They thought history would belong to them," he murmurs. "Now they will have to share, half a world away." In a secure building in Washington, the news arrives in a different form. Strange readings from a secret network of air sampling planes. Radioactive particles collected high above the Pacific. Analysts compare signatures, swap filters, run calculations. One afternoon, an Air Force officer drops a thin folder on the desk of a senior civilian. "It is not a test of ours," he says quietly. "It has to be the Soviets." Within hours, the word moves up the chain, from analysts to generals, from generals to the Joint Chiefs, from there to the Oval Office. President Truman sits very still as the briefing unfolds. He hears the dates, the wind patterns, the isotope ratios. At the end, he asks a single question. "So they have done it?" "Yes, Mr. President," comes the answer. The United States no longer has an atomic monopoly. Outside, Washington carries on as usual. Streetcars rattle. School children shout in playgrounds. Couples argue in doorways. No one on the sidewalk can see the balance shift. But inside the government, something fundamental has ended. In the Pentagon, the maps on the walls do not change, but the meaning of the red pins does. Those target lists, drawn up in the days when only American bombers could erase cities, now imply reply in kind. Any war plan that begins with atomic strikes must now answer a new question. And then what do they hit back with? At Los Alamos, the older scientists feel it like a physical weight. They remember the vault that held the third bomb. Its cold metal at once a horror and an assurance. For a brief sliver of time, they had believed that this terrible thing might be controlled from a single desert laboratory, a single chain of command. Now that illusion is gone. The third bomb's true power had never been in its blast. It had been in the space between its existence and the moment another country could answer it. In that space, the United States drew lines, offered aid, issued doctrines, and negotiated from a position that felt unshakable. The Soviet Union, staring at an empty hand, rushed science, pushed diplomacy to the edge, and hardened its sphere where it still had advantage. With one Soviet flash over Semipalatinsk, that strange, tilted world ends. From this day forward, leverage becomes balance, monopoly becomes race, and the shadow cast by the first American bombs is joined by another, darker and more symmetrical one. Strategy is no longer about how to use a weapon that only one side has, but how to live in a world where using it at all might mean the end of everything.